Um, Now, I know that we speak a lot, um, for a couple of years now since I decided to try my hand at career cryptozoology. You've been one of the chief advisors in a way, one chief advisors, one of the chief information providers. Because you've been dedicated to this lake monster search for so long, and I've really benefited from your obsession. That has benefited me, and I've got tens of files that you've sent to me over the years of different types of lake monster theory and lore. But of course, we're probably both really on the back of this Professor Gimel's eDNA um, research that was performed at Loch Ness, and the report, or the preliminary report, that was issued last year with the for many Nessie advocates, the unfortunate news that they didn't appear to find anything that would match that description in their eDNA report. Now, I know you've had a look at the report a little bit, or what's there to look at, and I know people
Yeah.
like Roland Watson have also
Well,
provided great breakdowns of that. But what I was really wanting to get to is your overview, your opinion of the report, and if you think essentially there are quite a few loopholes in what they've proclaimed to find, or what they could have found based
mm,
upon the sample they had in the first place to
well,
compare DNA to.
there appear to be some. Uh, One thing that Steve Feltham pointed out early on at the press conference with Gimel when they first announced all this is that there was no otter DNA found.
Mm,
And we know there are otters in Loch Ness
I've seen them. Yeah.
and they're in the water a lot. So theoretically,
Mm,
they should have got some otter DNA, and they didn't, which is kind of odd. So that tells you right there that theoretically that there are things that we know are in Loch Ness that were not picked up by the environmental DNA survey
mm.
that should have been. And another thing that was not found was any seal DNA.
Yes.
And well known that though there aren't a resident population of seals in Loch Ness, they do occasionally get in there. And you would think there would be some seal DNA, but then again, if they're not in there that regularly, it's possible that could have accounted for the lack of finding the environmental DNA of seals. But that was another oddball thing.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Relative to the plesiosaur idea, they found absolutely no reptilian DNA whatsoever. And there
Uh-huh.
are a few reptiles in Scotland that apparently do occur around Loch Ness.
Yes,
That's,
there would be grass snakes and black
yeah,
adders, and
one snake and I think two lizard species.
there's two types of skink, I believe, and there's also the western green lizard, which is from Europe but prolific throughout most of the UK now. So
Yeah,
that should have appeared. I've seen something when I was in Galloway Forest Park, which is not obviously it's far below Loch Ness, but still in Scotland. I saw a few skinks and the odd snake, even in
yeah.
winter time when we were there. So
Well,
they are about for sure.
one thing relative to this question that a lot of people don't seem to know that we should point out is there are no native freshwater turtles in the United Kingdom, period.
That's right.
There are in Europe, but there are none in the UK. Anytime you find a freshwater turtle in the UK, it's an invasive species or is a released pet.
That's right. Usually a terrapin, or the snapping turtle. There's a few of those about as well. And it's all
Yes.
because of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles craze of the 80s that started again in 2014 with the new movie that they made. I, in fact, had several terrapins as a child, and there was a local lake to us, a completely sealed off lake. There's no way out to the sea from it. There's some small rivers. Anyway, there was several bird islands in the middle of this lake, Rose Park Lake it was called, and really large terrapins you'd see sunning themselves on the islands in the summer that would just released into the lake when they became too big for
Yeah.
people to keep at home. And yeah, that
Well,
happened.
there are sea turtles that occur around the UK, but there are no indigenous freshwater turtles
No,
in the
they're not.
UK. A lot of people
That's right.
don't know that, you know.
That's right. That's
So
right. What did they find? DNA of freshwater turtles in the
no,
study? Oh
found
no.
absolutely
Okay.
no reptilian DNA whatsoever, which would
Yes.
appear to rule out plesiosaurs as being resident in Loch Ness.
Mm.
Now, if you had a situation where plesiosaurs were coming from the ocean and only occasionally coming into Loch Ness, you might not find their environmental DNA in the same way that you didn't find any seal DNA. So that
Mm.
doesn't rule out the remote possibility that there could be plesiosaurs coming from the ocean into Loch Ness occasionally and then going back
Hmm.
out and not hanging around long enough or recent enough to have left an eDNA signature.
Yes. Yes.
So all that really tells us, I think we can say with confidence that there is no resident population of plesiosaurs in Loch Ness, and it's also unlikely that there ever was, because if there was, like Robert Rines was talking about in the mid 2000s, that he thought the Nessies might have died off, and there
That's right.
and a bunch of carcasses laying on the bottom. Now, if that was the situation, they would have probably still found trace DNA from the dead carcasses laying on the bottom. So that seems to rule that possibility out too.
Yeah, I mean, they even talk about in the report. It's interesting about your speculation that they could have missed creatures that weren't there at the time or weren't in that area. So, one of the things they say in the report, I've got it open here in front of me, is Loch Ness is vast, and given that DNA signals in water dissipate quickly, lasting days to weeks at most, there remains the possibility there's something present we did not detect because we sampled in the wrong places at the wrong time, or our
Uh,
metabarcoding method could not detect Nessie because the sequence could not be matched with anything in the sequence databases, basically saying we don't have an example of plesiosaur DNA. Um,
that's
and if
true.
if that's the case, what we're using, and I think that they use some sort of lizard DNA mixed with something else to try to.
What they
Um,
tried to do is they tried to come up with a speculative DNA profile that
that's
fell
right.
somewhere between lizards and birds,
Uh-huh.
which would probably be close to what you would get from a non-avian dinosaur. But now
Hmm.
plesiosaurs were not dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
a separate group of reptiles. Now,
Uh-huh.
there's been a lot of speculation in the past that they were somehow related to turtles. So I would have thought maybe the DNA of a leatherback turtle might have been similar,
Mm.
but there's been debate about that too. So now they really don't know. They think the plesiosaur lineage falls somewhere between the lineage that led to lizards and snakes, the lepidosaurs, and the archosaurs, which includes the
Uh-huh.
dinosaurs, the crocodiles, pterosaurs, and living birds. So, you know, we just don't know. They thought one scientist back in the early 90s thought he had isolated a partial DNA sequence of a plesiosaur from a fossil, but
Uh-huh.
apparently now that has been dismissed as being contamination on the
Okay.
bone.
Okay.
Apparently now they can't reliably get a fossil DNA sequence from anything older than about 1.5 million years old,
Hmm.
which would be about probably late Pliocene
Uh-huh.
or the
Uh-huh.
Ice Age, right around the time the Ice Age started. So,
I mean, I wasn't even aware that they could go back as far as that. That's
yeah,
even to me,
well,
which is quite
there was a
impressive.
lot
But
of
still,
there was a lot of speculation that they had found DNA from T Rex bone marrow and
hmm
um,
what was that? What
horns
was that
of
lady's name?
triceratops. But apparently
Yes.
that's contamination too.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah,
It was, I know in the creationist community, it was lauded quite a lot, the blood cells and the DNA,
Yeah.
fresh condition, sort of, that's how it was described, that particular T-Rex bone. And I believe
Well,
that the,
it's
what was
real
her name?
bone marrow, but just the DNA signature from it is not reliable.
Okay, okay, so I mean, that's at least
Yeah.
valid. I understood that the professor who declared those findings apparently lost her job. I only wish I could remember her name off the top of my head.
I know who you're talking about. I can't remember
Mm,
her name.
no, me
But
neither.
anyway,
It's gone.
there's a Wikipedia page called Ancient DNA. If you want to look it up, that
Uh-huh.
goes through all the controversies in the present thinking on this.
That's
So,
amazing. That does.
in
Now,
other
one of the
words,
things sorry, go ahead.
well, in other words, we don't we kind of have I mean, you would have a reptilian DNA sequence from a plesiosaur, but how close it would match dinosaurs or lizards or what is an open question.
Yeah.
Myself, I lean toward that it would probably resemble turtle DNA, but there's, like I said, there's a lot of controversy about whether they're related to turtles
And
or not.
this is the thing. And so what I wonder, Scott, with the Professor Gimmel's eDNA test, his decision to go to Loch Ness, and he's admitted more or less, that this gave us a great opportunity to showcase the eDNA science to the world and show people what we could do. And of course, the Loch Ness monster is the catalyst to get the press attention. But it seems really that, from what we're describing in this test from the very beginning, if they even found DNA that was unknown, there was
Well,
possibly no way they could ever have categorized it against
there
or
is
proven it to
20,
be.
20 to 25% of what they got back was unidentifiable. But their interpretation of that
Yeah,
is that they were all the 20 or 25% that was unidentifiable
yeah,
was either too contaminated
yes,
or too fragmentary for them to identify. That does not mean that this is necessarily representing an unknown animal
yeah, yeah.
DNA sequence. So their interpretation is that 20 to 25% was unusable because it was contaminated or just too fragmentary.
Yeah,
So
I got that impression. That impression that basically it was just not usable to
yeah,
get any
oh,
sort of, yeah.
yes. On the other hand, what would, let's say we were dealing with a giant Tully monster. They don't even know what a
Mm,
Tully monster really is. What would a DNA sequence from a Tully monster look like?
exactly,
I don't know. Maybe they
exactly.
don't know either. But that's. I think we're better off being cautious and saying that 20 to 25% is just unidentifiable.
I would go along with that. It seemed to be
Yeah,
that they were
but
primarily saying that those samples were unusable,
there
essentially.
is there is a formal scientific refereed paper coming out. Darren Naish told me this. I don't know when it's coming out, what journal it's coming out in,
Uh-huh.
but it is out. So the best thing for us to do is wait and see the formal
Mm.
refereed hard data before we make any final conclusions.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
even Gemmel and his people say they want to go back and do better again. So this may
Well,
just be
there's
the first step in a long process.
yeah, well, I think so. And just playing devil's advocate here, they even say themselves they may have sampled in the wrong places. And after all, Loch Ness is vast, and it is vast in depth,
Yeah, and
especially.
there are weird things about the water quality in Loch Ness
Yes.
due to the heat contamination and all that
Mm,
kind of stuff. Who
a
knows? That
lot.
might the pH factor might be something to do with this. I really don't know, but the formal paper should address all this.
And do you think, especially when it came out for, people who've dedicated a lot of their lives to this study, people, Lochside people like Steve Feltham, for instance, like Adrian Shine, like Dick Rayner, that this would have been a big blow to some of those researchers, or just uh, an affirmation of something they'd suspected all along,
Well,
or does it just leave more questions than it's answered,
this
really?
environmental DNA survey had some important things to say about the different theories regarding different kinds of fish that people
Yes.
thought might be the Loch Ness monster. They
Hmm.
found absolutely no shark DNA, which would
Uh-huh.
appear to rule out Greenland sharks.
That's right. Sorry,
So,
Jeremy.
but like I said, relative to the plesiosaur idea, if a Greenland shark only occasionally came in and went back out again, then we can't completely rule it out. But it does rule out a resident population of Greenland sharks.
Hmm.
And I think you can pretty much um, put the Wells catfish idea to bed, because Wells catfish do not occur in the Moray Firth, to my knowledge, and
No,
I
they
don't
don't.
think they migrate very far in the waters that they live in. In other words, they may occasionally go into salt water, but it's not a regular thing for them. So
No.
the idea that there were Will's catfish in Loch Ness was based on the idea that somebody had stocked them there many, many years ago, and there was a resident population of them in Loch Ness that had been living
Exactly.
on and possibly dying out. So the fact that they found no Will's catfish DNA in Loch Ness seems to tell me there is no resident population of Will's catfish in Loch Ness, and it's highly unlikely that they would be migrating in from the Moray Firth, which is a body of salt water. So I think, based on that, I think you can lay the Will's catfish idea to bed. And the sturgeon idea, now the sturgeon idea has always been based on the premise that oceanic sturgeon come in from salt water
Hmm.
into rivers and bodies of fresh water to spawn. Now, if you have a situation like that, of sturgeons coming in from the Moray Firth, occasionally into Loch Ness, that idea is still viable, because if they're only occasionally coming in, you might miss their environmental DNA signature. So I wouldn't rule out the sturgeon idea, but I think you pretty much well lay to bed the idea that there's a resident population of plesiosaurs or a resident population of Wells catfish in Loch Ness. I think
Uh-huh.
Steve Phelps pretty much well throw in the towel on that idea, but he hasn't ruled out there being a Loch Ness monster,
Yes. No.
which is
Well,
prudent.
I saw that,
That's,
and for somebody like him that's dedicated, such a wealth of time and life uh,
well, yeah. I mean,
to this
I've been
this
looking.
lakeside research.
I've been looking for 27 years, but I'm
Mm.
not out there every day. You know,
No. No.
for the
No.
last 8 years, I've only been going back once a year, but I'm still looking. But not like he has. I mean, he's there every day.
But
So
that's his
you got to
life
give
and
him.
livelihood, as far as I'm aware. Yes.
You got to give him props for that. That's
Absolutely.
basically what he does all the time.
I I think it
Um,
takes a special kind of dedication, and without a little bit of obsession, you just wouldn't make it through. You'd have to be kind of obsessed in a way, wouldn't
yeah,
you? You must feel that way yourself. You had your sighting. Let's just talk about that as well. You had your sighting, was it in 1992 or 93?
94.
94, 94. And just
July
go
of
through that. Describe that.
1994. Well, I was at a place called Battery Park in Burlington, Vermont, up
Uh-huh.
on a bluff, watching out toward the lake with binoculars. And I noticed out near a buoy about 1,000 yards out this big hump-looking object come up about 15 feet long with a smaller hump-like object on top of it. It was a
Uh-huh.
garbage bag color, kind of colored up like a leatherback turtle, a greeny
Oh.
black, but without the spots that you see on a leatherback turtle.
Uh-huh.
Then the object turned to the right, and when it did, that smaller object was on the right end of the larger hump, and it had the appearance of either a head or a flipper sticking up in the air.
Uh-huh.
And it started swimming with kind of a bobbing motion, swam to the right for maybe about 10 seconds, and then stopped, and then sank like a rock, and it was over.
Wow.
I didn't have a camera, but I went home the same day, and I made drawings, and I still have those. The drawings I made the very same day, hours after it happened.
Wow. And I think actually I have seen some of those drawings in the past. Now, when you were looking out onto the lake at that point? Had you gone there because you're interested in Champ, or were you just there on some type of holiday, living in the area,
No,
and your interest
I
started
had,
after that?
I had purposely moved to Burlington, Vermont, to pursue the champ question. So I was out there
Okay.
watching the lake from a place that I thought might be a good place to look.
And it was.
Uh, and yeah, I just got lucky. And since that happened, two pieces of evidence that resemble what I saw have popped up.
Uh-huh.
15 years after I had my sighting in 2009, Eric Olson videoed something very similar in shape to what I
Uh-huh.
saw at
Yes.
Oakwood Park in Burlington. They're very similar. And then July 4th of 2017, William Dragunis and myself were over where the Bodette video was filmed at the
Uh-huh.
mouth of the Sable River, and a similar shaped object swam underneath the boat, and we got a sonar graph of it.
Yes, I remember that. We were discussing just yesterday that there may appear to be horned-like protuberances on top of the what might be the head of the creature, if it is a
Yeah,
creature.
on the
That sonar
sonar,
image.
graph, you see this round body with what appears like a long neck-looking structure and possibly a head, and there's the indication of two little bumps on top of that head-looking object.
I mean, that would be a fascinating um,
Yeah,
corroboration. Some of the Loch Ness
speculation
sightings.
about what these are. Yeah, I mean, the Indians call these creatures the great horned serpent. So
Hmm.
they talked about them having horns and snorkels too. And then there's the famous underwater gargoyle head picture that Robert Rhines got back in
Yes.
1975 that some people believe is a tree stump and other people believe is the head of the Loch Ness Monster. It appears to have these horns or snorkel-like structures too.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It certainly does. And I
So
mean,
I
interestingly,
don't know. The point is, nobody knows at this point, but it's
we
certainly
don't.
intriguing and keep looking.
But it
And
does.
there's a
They do seem
skill.
to. They do seem to be featured. These horn-like protuberances do seem to be featured in quite a number of lake monster sightings
Yeah,
worldwide. Yeah.
there's one really good one from 1971 from Lake Champlain that describes these horns. But
And
um,
what is that one?
oh, I'd have to look it up. I can't remember off the
Uh-huh.
top of
I
my head.
see.
A
Yes.
guy was fishing in 1971 and saw one with horns. I think he estimated the size of the creature to be about 40 feet long, but I find that a
Okay.
little hard to buy. But maybe he just was so excited he overestimated the size. But he clearly
Sure.
described two snorkel-like horns, and there's a still from the Olsen video where you see the indication of two bump-like objects on top of the
Mm,
head, which
mm.
could be ears or these horn-like objects. Nobody knows.
And do you think, because correct me if I'm wrong, most champ sightings tend to be within the 15 to 20 feet length, or approximately around
Yeah,
about that length. Is that right?
15, 15, 16 feet long. The
Uh-huh.
object, the animal or object that the Bodette and a Falter saw was estimated to be 15 feet long. When Liz von Muggenthaler recorded her echolocation-like sounds, in 2003, something swam underneath the boat at the same time the sounds were recorded. And
Uh-huh.
based on the sonar from that, they estimated that was about 15, 16 feet long. And what I saw with my own eyes, I compared with a boat and figured out was probably about 15 feet long. So
But
there's
that was
three
just a
lines of
section of
evidence.
the animal you saw, not the entire
Well, I think it's
creature.
probably most likely most of the length, I would think, but
Uh-huh.
you know, but I wouldn't really think they would get any bigger than 20 feet long myself.
Sure. I mean, most of the sightings I've come across in my very brief study of Lake Champlain seem to be around about that length. And what about characteristics, physical characteristics? And we've talked about some horn-like protuberances on the head, but what about the descriptions of the head that people have given? Um, are they normally long-necked? Do people describe them as they did hear historically as having a horse-like head or dog-like head, or is it the
Horse,
eel-headed, reptile-headed?
horse-headed or snake-headed usually.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Uh,
And do you think that's something that people sort of kind of pluck out of their mental library, as it were, the comparative animal that sort
well,
of closely fits what they're looking at? We're
this
not.
would be a good time to point out to people about the partial unreliability of eyewitness testimony.
Uh-huh.
Because the human memory does not work like a video camera.
Mm-hmm.
People's memories can mutate over time, and they're very vulnerable to the power of suggestion. You know, if you suggest to somebody, oh, you saw this or you saw that, their memory can actually mutate into the suggestion that you have made to them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I try, for the most part, to put the emphasis on other forms of evidence, such as photographs, videos, audio recordings. I mean, these are things that can be re-examined over and over and over again. You know, you
Yeah.
can go back and analyze and study these things. You can't go back in a time machine and see what an eyewitness thought they saw.
That's right. That's right. I was saying to somebody recently about
And
that.
if you take somebody that believes what they saw and give them a lie detector test, they're going to pass the lie detector test, but all that tells you is that what they believe they saw is what they believe they saw. They're
right.
telling you the truth about what they remember or their impression of what they remember. That does not tell you exactly what they saw. It just tells you that they believe this is what they saw, and they're telling you the truth to the best of their ability. Now, on the plus side of eyewitness testimony, when you have multiple people that all see the same thing at the same time and seem to report to you that that's what they saw, and they're consistent across the board for the most part, that means something. That's not a hallucination. That's more than one witness telling you, corroborating each other. So that's important. Those sort of sightings are in a different category than just one person that saw something. If somebody has a photograph or a video and you can find no evidence that the video has been tampered with, and it basically corroborates their eyewitness testimony, that's important too. So, you know, it's not wise, despite the shortcomings of eyewitness testimony, it's not wise to just immediately throw it all in the garbage because you're throwing away the baby with the bathwater. Eyewitness testimony has some relevance to this because there are apparently things that you can get out of eyewitness testimony, you know, things that people claim about the behavior of these animals and all this stuff that you need to take into consideration. However, you shouldn't build the foundation of your case primarily on the eyewitness testimony. You should give it proper weight, but it's more prudent to build the strength of your case on other forms of evidence, material forms of circumstantial evidence.
Well, I would agree with that. From my personal perspective, I think eyewitness testimony, it's the billboard on the highway that tells you where the next rest stop is or where you should be heading to. And without it, we wouldn't be searching for anything anyway. But it's not proof of anything. It's just an indication.
It's best, even with the best material evidence you have at this point, the best you can do is a circumstantial case. The only thing that's going to break through that wall is a type specimen or a piece of a type specimen of some sort, preferably one that's already dead. I don't condone hurting or harming one of these animals or killing one if they exist. There ought to be a way, either getting a tissue sample through some harmless means like a biopsy dart, which I have been trying to do.
I was just going to ask you about that. Now, you have one of these for your next expedition, is that right?
I mean, well, I've been using them since 2017. So
okay.
it's just a question being lucky. I mean, they tried for many, many, many years at Loch Ness to do the same thing, and were never able to get close enough to
Yes.
one to do anything with it. So, but it's better safe than sorry. If one does pop up 2 feet away from the boat, and I can
Yeah.
dig a tissue sample, better to be prepared than
Yes.
just sit around like an idiot. So
Well, I think
probably more doable is looking for bones of ones that died recently, or maybe even died during the period of the Champlain Sea, that might be laying in the bottom of some cave that's above water now. That's the other tack I'm taking. So
that I think that's a good idea too. Now, what are the water conditions like at Lake Champlain? When I visited, it was quite murky, but I was told that that was quite unusual. There'd been some sort of algae bloom at that time.
well,
What's it like ordinarily in its best state?
well, sometimes the water is clear and other times it's very cloudy. In 2017, when William Guinness, my late partner, and I were out on his boat, we had underwater cameras we deployed, and the water clarity was so bad there was no usable photos or videos from underwater. So, but then back in 2014, we did the same thing, and we had really nice water clarity in Button Bay. But unfortunately, the only thing we managed to capture on the underwater camera of significance was one fish, probably a salmon. So it's just a question of being in the right place at the right time with good water clarity. I mean, look at what Robert Rines did in the 1970s at
I
Loch
mean,
Ness.
so impressive to capture that
Yeah,
in water like Loch Ness, where you can barely see
you have
your
an
hand in front of your
you have
face.
an
It's
open
amazing.
mind about the existence of the Loch Ness monster. That's
Mm.
some of the best evidence there is. I
Um,
mean, it's been heavily criticized over the last 40,
yes.
50 years, but some people still find it valid. Me being among them. The underwater flipper photos and the long neck body shot with the two flippers are very impressive.
Well,
And,
let's just talk about that evidence very briefly. I know a lot of people aren't familiar with it, but for people who've not heard of it before, let's talk about Robert Rines, the man, about his achievements and the stature and expertise of this individual that would made it so unusual, actually, for him to spend
well,
so much time at Loch Ness, devoting his reputation, which was at great risk.
well, he was both a scientist and a patent attorney.
Hmm.
So he was he's credited with developing several innovations in sonar and radar back in the 40s and 50s. Plus, like I said, he was a patent attorney, and he was
He
not
was an
only
inventor.
involved inventing things, but patenting certain inventions too with his partners. He was associated with a lot of people from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Mhm.
And some of these were very heavyweight scientists that had developed innovations in photographic techniques, like Doc Edgerton developed
Mhm.
the underwater cameras that Jacques Cousteau used back in the 60s, was the inventor of strobe photography. And another associate of Rines was Charles Wyckoff, who took the first photographs of atomic bomb explosions.
Wow.
So these were some really heavyweight scientists with impeccable reputations that worked with
Mhm.
him at Loch Ness. They had an organization they put together called the Academy of Applied Sciences. And under that auspices, they went to Loch Ness over a period of 38 years. Ryan's last expedition was in 2008. His first one was in 1970. So he looked for the Loch Ness Monster for 38 years,
Wow.
which alone is very impressive. I mean, that's longer than Tim Dinsdale did. Tim
Hmm.
Dinsdale for a quarter of a century, but Rines was there for 38 years.
I mean, that to me is really amazing. But what amazes me more is, of course, his evidence wasn't completely conclusive because, again, we didn't get a sample, we just got pictures. But
Yeah.
this, with his
Well,
reputation, with the
his
reputation
last
of the
few
team.
years, his last few years, they were actively looking with ROVs for physical remains buried in the bottom of the rock because he thought, because of the lack of sonar contacts that he had been getting for like the last 3 or 4 years that he was going over there, that he assumed that the Nessie population had died off and their bodies were laying on the bottom of Loch Ness. And he was actually concentrating on trying to find skeletal remains or pieces of skin from dead ones. If you watch the Monster Quest episode, Death at Loch Ness, that documents his last expedition.
I've
The
seen
year
that.
after that, he died of a heart attack, unfortunately. But the underwater photographs in the 1970s had enough backing from different scientists, most of them in the United States, that him and Peter Scott were able to go into the journal Nature and give the Loch Ness Monster a Latin name as a tentative new species called Narcissus rhomptopteryx. And the foundation for that argument was the flipper pictures from 1972, which they maintained also had a simultaneous sonar contact showing two large objects moving in the same area as the camera at the same time these flipper pictures were taken. So their interpretation and the interpretation of some of the sonar experts that they showed this to was that these were two large animals chasing a school of fish. And that they passed by the camera and you see these two flipper-like images. Now that was all fine from 1975 up until 1983. In 1983, they were accused of retouching the photographs
I remember that.
to make them into flippers. Now, they came back, their rebuttal was that the final flipper images were made by taking the original unenhanced images and running them through various types of color filters to bring out additional elements that were in the images that were distorted by photographic
content.
artifacts.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, before that, first, they were run through a computer program at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory by a guy named Alan Gillespie, who's an astrogeologist professor. He's still a professor teaching out at a university somewhere out west. Anyway, they ran them through this computer program that NASA used to clean up pictures from space. And what this thing did, this computer program compared the different pixels, broke the image down into pixels and compared the adjacent pixels to each other and cleared up the image. So once that was done, Charlie Wyckoff, who we referred to earlier, took that computer processed image, then run that through various different types of color filters to bring out different elements that were supposedly in the original image. Then Wyckoff took the different color enhancements and sandwiched them all together into one image to produce the final flipper image. Now, the critics of this process maintained that once the final images were done, that somebody went in there and airbrushed them and made them look more like flippers. Now, Rhines and Gillespie and Wyckoff published extensive rebuttals against those arguments, saying that no, that's not the case. But people who did not want to believe this elaborate process that the pictures went through refused to believe it and bought the idea that these pictures were faked and had been doctored and all this. So you got one group of people saying no, they're authentic, and you got another group of people saying no, they've been doctored. So the general overall consensus is that either these pictures are really the flippers of the Loch Ness monster, or they're possibly pictures of flipper-like shapes in the mud on the bottom of the lake.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh. I
that's
mean,
that's where you're at today. So
and I
personally,
think,
I apply the argument that they are the appendages of an animal, but other people do not, and
yeah.
there's an extensive series of arguments on both sides that if you read all the literature, you just have to make up your own mind. That's all I can tell you. It's so
And
complicated.
whereas if this was a different person, a different individual that was presenting this evidence, and even with the photographic process at that time that they were using being very experimental, and that was the reputation of these men anyway, you can still say that okay, perhaps they got it wrong, perhaps they did photograph part of the bed of the loch there, but these men, this man who had 800 patents, started a law school, wrote musicals, yeah, had honorary
Yeah,
doctorates from
you look,
countries
you look
all over the
for
world. This
people.
isn't a man. This isn't a man who makes those
Well,
kinds of mistakes.
you
And
look at people involved and their reputations.
mm,
Nobody has ever criticized any of their other work other than the
no,
work that they did at Loch Ness. And I
exactly,
think
exactly.
part of the reason why this is there is a certain element in the scientific community that is totally biased against even the possibility of there existing a Loch Ness monster
Yes,
based on their own philosophical, scientific, what they're willing to believe in.
yes,
And when there appeared evidence that might suggest that people were actually right about there being a Loch Ness
mm.
monster, they put their foot down in
I
a
think you're right with that.
nasty, biased sort of way. So
I
I
think you,
think
yes,
I'm not saying that most of the scientific community has an attitude like that, but I think there is a small vocal minority that refuses to even entertain the possibility that there could be some truth behind this. And they put their foot down and they came up with an ad hoc hypothesis that could potentially explain it away and just kept yelling it over and over and over again till a significant group of people said, "Well, yeah, you're probably right because you're you keep hammering away at it." So I don't know.
of course, and many of those, let's say, men, many of those scientific figures at that time who were against it would have been very influential
Yeah,
characters whose word carried a lot of weight
there
in this
are
field.
people, there are people that were pro Nessie that got bullied by their colleagues
Hmm.
into becoming anti Nessie, such as Maurice Burton.
Yes,
I
yes,
think Maurice Burton got scared about his own reputation and did an about face around the same time that the ichthyologist Dennis Tucker got fired from the British Museum over Nessie.
that's right.
I think that scared the crap out of Maurice Burton, and he did an about face. But
Well,
that's
there was
just a,
what was the
that
documentary
really
that
happened, you know.
there was a former natural history museum, one of the main people in there, not the head. Anyway, he was in the documentary years ago, and I wish I could remember his name. So this is just sort of conjecture, I guess, since I can't reference the person. Anyway, in the documentary says it was very common knowledge at the time that if you went up from the museum to Loch Ness, when you came back,
Yeah,
you wouldn't have a job anymore, and
that's
that
John
was
Lamb's head that used
there's
to
that
be the
head.
head.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And he's
Yes.
talking about, he says, one of my predecessors actually got sacked from his job from going up
Yes.
on the lock. And that's who he's talking about is Dennis
That's
Tucker.
that's it.
Well
So,
known story.
but I think, the science, because of the advent of the internet these last 20, 30 years, I know it's 30 years or so, science has become less of a dictatorship because not a democracy, but less of a dictatorship because of the freedom of information and the access that people have to it. Whereas back in those times and those days, those people
Well,
at the top could control the flow.
one
And I
thing
think
you need to
philosophically
understand,
speaking, they were more rigid about what they thought about the
yeah,
possibilities of
one thing
living
that's
fossils
very
and so on
important,
and so forth.
one thing that's very important for you to understand is that the working scientists, the biologists, the paleontologists that actually do the work, don't necessarily have the same opinions as academic administrators who run these organizations and institutions. Sometimes there can be very different opinions among the academic administrators than there are among the workaday scientists. And it seems like most of the bias against things like parapsychology and cryptozoology seem to emanate from the academic administrators who are worried about funding for these organizations. So that's very important to distinguish that, you might have some ichthyologists or marine biologists sitting around the coffee room talking about Nessie, just entertaining ideas, and then their boss, the administrator, comes walking in and say, "Oh, we better shut up about this," These type of things, scientific institutions and scientists try to be objective, but they're still human beings at the same time. So there's scientific politics and resistance to new ideas and prejudices and biases that all come in because everybody is human. And people have different ideas about what they're willing to accept is possible as being real or not. I mean, the parapsychologists, they're actually, the Parapsychological Association is actually a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. But they barely got in, and there's still controversy to this day about their membership in it. And the International Society of Cryptozoology went belly up back in the early 2000s, and unfortunately, they were never able to build up enough a reputation to try to get in like the Parapsychological Association did. But the thing is, to me, it's more easier to believe from a rational standpoint in the idea of an unknown animal species we haven't found yet, and a ghost. But yet,
Most
the
definitely.
Parapsychological Association is in the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So some people consider parapsychology a legitimate science.
Could that be
So
because
I mean,
Scott?
I'm not
Could
trying.
that be
I'm not
because
trying
the
to disparage. I'm not trying to disparage anything about parapsychology. I'm just trying to illustrate a point. Is that the hunt for psychic phenomena is considered a science, a legitimate science, and by some people in the scientific community. So I don't see why the search for unknown animals should be frowned upon if they're accepting psi phenomena.
Well,
Is
I
what I'm
wonder if it's because the burden of proof is, as the non-corporeal, so to speak, would be far lower for parapsychology than it would be for cryptozoology, which is the search for animals we have not yet discovered or
well,
have believed to become extinct, and therefore we have to produce something. Whereas the subject of whether paranormal
well,
beings
they
are
can't
real
really
at all, it's academic, isn't it? It could be purely
at
based
this
upon
point.
opinion.
At this point, even the pro-parapsychology people, they say there is a phenomenon, but they don't really know what it is yet. They believe there's something there, but they can't tell you how it works or what's behind it.
There
Some
you
people
go.
have said that what we call parapsychology has nothing to do with the mind or the conventional field of psychology. Some people have insisted in calling it paraphysics, that it's closer to something, to some unknown physics law that we don't understand yet.
Okay,
And
I mean
it's
that would
probably
make a lot
close
more sense to
to,
me.
yeah, that is probably closer to being some kind of advanced quantum mechanics thing that we don't understand yet. Because
So,
some concepts in abstract experimental physics are mind-boggling. Sound like something. So they apparently are, supported by mathematical formulas. So Yeah.
Well, henceforth, because that's sort of unquantifiable as it stands, it's easier to administer it into the scientific, into the regulated and the accepted scientific bodies. Whereas for cryptozoology, essentially, once you find the animal and categorize it, it's a life, it's part of the general life sciences, it's part of
Yeah.
the zoological taxa of the known world. So, um,
DNA work
basically
that is,
trying to administer, we're trying to
yeah.
implement that some of these animals get placed into the books, to the regular
Well,
books of what is
they have
known to
tried
exist, like
they
the.
have tried the DNA thing with Sasquatch and Nessie, and the results are that so far the best evidence from Loch Ness is that we're dealing with possibly a giant eel because of the massive
Huh.
amount of eel DNA that was found.
But what about the morphology? That doesn't match
Well,
any of the sightings.
the thing is, there are, and I have photographs of this, there are eels with hormonal imbalances
Huh.
that can have a fat central body and a thinning toward the head that can resemble a long neck. So it is possible. If you
But
had a
raised out of the water?
eel, yeah, yeah. If you had I've got a picture of one
Oh,
with the
really?
body raised up out of the water. So yeah, it is possible in theory.
Okay.
My
Okay.
problem with the eel idea is that I can't buy the idea of a 3 or 4 6 foot eel growing to 10
Hmm.
to 20 feet long. However, there are marine eels called conger eels that are very similar in their
Uh-huh.
appearance that can get 10 feet long and as big around as a telephone pole. I could
That's
see
right.
one of those growing to 10, 15 feet long, but they're supposed to not be able to survive freshwater conditions.
No.
However, my friend, who's been one of the most active promoters of the idea that the Loch Ness Monster and similar monsters could be giant eels, is William McDonald. He claims to have kept a conger eel in a freshwater aquarium for a few years until it died. So,
Okay.
if what he's saying is true, it's possible that perhaps a conger eel could survive freshwater conditions.
Well, we do have conger eels around the British Isles. I used to go night fishing with my father on a little motorized, on a little motorboat, just off the coast of Cardiff in Wales, and we've hooked, I think, a 5 to 6 foot conger eel at points. And once they get in the boat, you really wish you didn't get them in the first place. They're
Well, they're very
incredibly
aggressive.
violent,
Yeah,
very aggressive. Yeah.
very aggressive.
But they
But
are huge.
if you had a say a hypothetically a 15-foot conger eel with a fat body, like I'm talking about, you would have a reasonable approximation of the Loch Ness monster. So that's why I keep an open mind about this idea.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that's interesting. Um, Again, to fit these very unusual creatures into commonly known phenomena, we do have to take some odd twists and turns, and that's something that's always interested
Yeah,
me about
but
skeptical approaches. That often the
eels are
skeptical
vulnerable.
approach has to
Eels
be.
are vulnerable to hormonal imbalances that can cause them to change and mutate. Eels during their larval stage go through several different stages, almost like a
Mhm,
tadpole turned into a
that's right.
frog. So if you mess with their hormonal uh, things at any one of those stages, you could produce some kind of very strange looking mutation. So I think it's a perfectly viable idea to the
Uh-huh.
plesiosaurs. Yeah, I mean, I hope I want there to be plesiosaurs in Loch Ness and Lake Champlain, but I'm just looking at it realistically. This
Sure,
is a
sure.
viable alternative, and the fact that they've got so much ill DNA pointing in that direction is certainly worth our attention.
I definitely think that that's right, but of course they couldn't quantify whether they would be large eels, just eels, because the size doesn't
Yeah,
sort of register
they're
with that kind of
just
study.
saying we've got an overwhelming amount of ill
Yeah.
DNA, whether that's from a few extremely large eels or if it's just from a larger population of eels that they expected to find in Loch Ness, we don't know yet. I think they want to go back and do more work to try to answer that question. That's the
Well,
impression I've got from interviews. So,
I do think that Loch Ness has always had quite a healthy eel population, as far as I'm aware. I think even Steve Felton mentioned when the news came through that one of the first things he saw on his first visit was an eel, in the loch. And but even though there have been changes in eel populations around the UK in recent years, it's still we tend to have quite a viable population throughout that
Yeah.
migrate in and out, and um, as it were,
Well,
to
I
breed
will say
so across the
this,
sea.
that of all the different theories that have been put forward to account for these animals, the two theories that I've been able to get the most interesting information out of and reliable results are the plesiosaur idea and the
Hmm.
eel. Those are
Yeah.
the two ones that I've been able to make fit the best. So
Well, yeah, I
that
understand that the
doesn't necessarily
plesiosaur.
say that either one of them is right, but that is the truth.
That's right. And we don't know. Of course, the land sightings
Uh,
do pose a bit of a problem for the eel theory, with some.
not really, no, because eels are amphibious occasionally.
No, not because of their amphibious nature when migrating, but because of the described morphology of the creatures that are seen. Flippers, um,
Well,
fat
they do
bodies,
have
long necks, long
a
tails.
front. They do have a set of front pectoral fins,
They do.
which could be like flippers. So if they're
They
dragging
do.
along, there seems to be some confusion among eyewitnesses about a set of back appendages.
Uh-huh. But
So,
how
I,
big would these creatures have to be to surprise somebody like that? I mean, if you see a migrating eel, let's say you saw a 6 or 7 foot migrating eel, if there was one of that size in Loch Ness, crossing the road in search of a new water source on its way out to the sea, you're not going to really mistake that for, like the
well, like
surprise
I
sighting
said,
for a creature with a big,
depends
bulbous
on
body and
on
a long
how
neck.
well it depends on how fat the central body is. If you've
So it
got
would
an
have to be
eel,
very, very mutated
it has to be
then.
very, very fat, yes. But it is possible. I've actually got photographs of eels
No,
that
sure.
body configuration.
I
So,
see that. I see that.
yeah.
I concede that, but it still seems. What I'm very interested in, Scott, really, is, like Roland talks about my theory sucks the least theory. So it's sometimes in our skeptical arguments, and we have to be skeptical because essentially by
Well, yeah.
possibly believing in the existence of a plesiosaur in our day and age, that's a huge ask. It's a huge leap. It's only really the
Well,
witness sightings that make us even
reason
consider it. But
most
what I'm
people
interested in
don't
with the
understand that one reason that the paleontologists are so skeptical about the idea is that during the known accepted period that the plesiosaurs are thought to have been alive in the Mesozoic, their remains are found everywhere. They found all over the earth. And then after the KT event, they seem to just completely disappear except for fragmentary remains found many, many millions of years apart in
Mhm.
different parts of the world. They might find a toe bone, they might find a vertebrae, they might find, let's see, there's been toe bones found, vertebrae
Mhm.
found, and teeth found, but never a full skull. But these have been found as young as the Ice Age and all the way spread through the age of mammals. Now, the main point I'm trying to make here is that from the time of the presumed extinction of the plesiosaurs, you've got a 60 million year period where all these mammals came along and filled the niches of the former dinosaurs and marine reptiles. And then you've got, after that, you've got about 2 million years of ice ages. So you've got a period of like 66 million years of basically a missing fossil gap for the plesiosaurs. And in theory, for them to have survived to the modern times, they would have to have robust populations and there would have to be multiple species over time. Now, it's not impossible if you consider the idea they may have took refuge out in the deep ocean, and when the KT event happened, the main thrust of what happened is that when the meteor hit, it put ejecta of material, a dust cloud, up into the atmosphere that blocked the photosynthetic food chain from the sun, killing the plant life that relied on sunlight, which was the base of the food chain. So in theory, this was the catalyst that rippled up the food chain from the animals that ate vegetation and the predators that ate the vegetarians, and they all starved to death. And this presumably happened in the ocean too, with phytoplankton that was dependent on sunlight. Well, now we know there is a food chain in the ocean that is independent of sunlight, that is propelled by heat vents, chemicals coming out of these black smokers. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you mean. In the deep ocean. Yeah, there's volcanic vents.
These food chains that exist in the deep ocean are down so deep where sunlight doesn't penetrate. They're chemical based. Now, it's possible, just possible, that maybe some of these marine reptiles, when this KT event happened, were able to exploit by going down and finding these vent fauna food chains and surviving on that to squeak through with much reduced populations that managed to stay out in the deep ocean. We haven't found them yet. And that maybe a few of them came into these places like Loch Ness and Lake Champlain when they were connected to the sea at the end of the Ice Age and got trapped, or just occasionally come in and out. So we don't know, but that is possible. I mean, that's a lot of improbable contingencies to give way to, but it's not impossible. It's merely improbable.
Well, my issue with that essentially is it's based on conjecture in the first place. Nobody really asked with this KT event. The plant life dies off. The vegetarians have nothing to eat. There's no phytoplankton in the sea. Also, then the carnivores have nothing to eat. Everything starves to death. But we still have animals today. So if there was such an event, there should be no animals. There should be no life on Earth right now. I don't believe such a thing happened, or at least not to that extent.
That's the Achilles heel of the whole argument.
Always.
Is that why didn't the crocodiles die out? Why didn't the turtles die out? The sea turtles didn't die out. Yeah, the sharks didn't die out either.
And we have other animals that came that exist today. There should be nothing alive on Earth, and nobody ever asked that. Why is there life on Earth right now? If that event really happened, I think if there was such a thing, that it was more localized or shorter lived, and really the dates and the times people give, they're unquantifiable. It's still based on some conjecture, and there's a domino effect that happens after that.
I believe it really happened. The standard arguments that the paleontologists put forward. I just question the fact that a plesiosaur was any different from a normal animal like a crocodile or a sea turtle, why the lottery would choose to wipe out all the plesiosaurs and not all the sea turtles.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I mean, we like to look at dinosaurs based on Jurassic Park like they were monsters. But no, they were animals.
That's right.
They were animals just like a Siberian tiger or a Kodiak bear. They were scary animals, but they were just animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't know,
No, I'm with you.
I don't believe that dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and pterosaurs were specifically targeted by a cosmic lottery to be wiped out, where the animals that survived were somehow different.
It just doesn't make sense that there was nothing to eat.
Maybe it's just my opinion, but that's my opinion.
Exactly. And I'm with you. I agree with you on that. It doesn't make sense from that perspective. I understand it's used as a model to explain something. It's still theoretical largely, but still, I think
we're used to seeing dinosaurs in basically monster movies.
Yeah.
And we think if we could go back in a time machine, that it would be like a Godzilla movie. I guarantee you, if you went back in a time machine and could see it for what it is, after about an hour, you'd be bored and want to go back.
Yeah.
You'd have seen it because they're just animals.
Like watching cows grazing.
Exactly. Or watching
Exactly.
lions on the Serengeti. I'm not saying, that it's not something to see, but I'm just saying it's not like
Yeah.
watching a movie.
Yeah. You wouldn't spend your life there on the
And
Serengeti.
let's
It's nice
say,
for a look-see, a
let's
holiday.
say hypothetically, we eventually find Champ or find Nessie. And once we find it, after a certain period of time, they're just going to become regular animals that we accept, and they're not going to be special anymore. The fact that we don't know for sure that they exist, we suspect they exist, and we don't know so much about them is what makes them so exciting right now. If we knew that they definitely existed and could observe them on a regular basis, they wouldn't be special anymore.
Like the giant squid, like the
Exactly.
Komodo dragon, like the gorilla. These
Yeah,
things are
they're
relatively
still,
recent discoveries.
yeah, they're still exciting to a point, but it's not like, oh, they're a monster,
Yeah,
They
exactly.
used to be monsters, but now they're just animals. And hopefully we can do that with these things like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. If they exist, we can find them and they'll just become regular animals. That's the goal. At least that's my goal.
Same here, and I look forward to that day. If the will is there at some point, I think technology will lead the way. Some sort of mapping of those surfaces where you can accurately map the entire surface of Loch Ness or Lake Champlain and everything that's in it, and get a perfect mapped sonar reading of the entire area. It will exist in the future.
Well,
That's my view.
they're
That
working on it.
technology will
They're
come into.
actually, there's an outfit called Kongsberg Limited that has been surveying Loch Ness for almost 20 years now, and they're mapping the bottom of Loch Ness pretty much in a similar way that the Manleys have produced a topographic map of the bottom of Lake Champlain. So it's happening, but it's not done yet.
That's amazing.
These, AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles. They're kind of like a programmable ROV that doesn't have a tether. They program it to go out to a certain area and map the bottom and then come back. So they don't tethers like an ROV. They're free swimming like a missile, like an underwater missile almost.
That's the kind of technology I'd really like to look into. Scott, for maybe not so much Loch Ness, but Loch Morar and some of the clearer.
Remember when they found the movie model at the bottom of Loch Ness they'd been looking for almost years? ROV to AUV is what found it.
Oh, really?
That's how they found it. Yeah. So if you'll look on YouTube for videos about the discovery of that monster model, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
That's from the Christopher Lee Sherlock Holmes, I believe. Is it that one?
Yes. Secret Life of Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, where he played Sherlock Holmes' brother.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Played Michael. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really fantastic. And to find it still there, I mean, the pictures were amazing as well.
Well, yeah.
The sonar pictures.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
it was big. It was probably 20 feet long, something like that.
Yeah, it was huge.
And
it looks.
One of the buoyancy tanks was wrong or something, and it just sank like a rock.
Yeah, something happened. But it just goes to show it was lost forever in that old time. Well, talking about Loch Ness and Lake Champlain, now Loch Ness is around about, I think it's about 25 miles long, thereabouts, 1 to 1.5 miles wide, very deep, allegedly up to 750 feet deep, allegedly. But Lake Champlain, I mean, this is what, 112, 140 miles long, 14 miles widest, as wide as point.
129 miles long.
129 miles.
Yeah, but it's only 400 feet deep.
Well, still.
With an average depth of 64 feet. But no, it's still a lot of water. You get out in the middle of it, you think it's on the ocean.
So what I felt when I was there was that, and having been to Loch Ness a few times, it's the difference in the available habitat in a place like Champlain was
Well,
huge. I saw lots of wildlife. It's got lots of
yeah,
fish, like
Lake
lots of
Champlain
turtles.
has a lot more biodiversity than Loch
Mm.
Ness does. Loch Ness seems to have enough there to support barely a small population of large animals. But
Mhm.
Lake Champlain has much more biodiversity. It has amphibians, water snakes, water turtles,
Mhm.
83 different kind of fish. So there's plenty for something to eat in there, a small
Are there are
population.
there otters and
It
beaver as
supports,
well?
yeah, and water birds. Actually, in 2004, some Maryland tourists claimed to have seen a champ creature trying to attack a seagull. So it's probably a good bet that they eat water birds occasionally.
Uh-huh.
And Dave Gibson, who's a Bigfoot guy, has also said he observed birds getting off the water as the sun was going down, like they were trying to avoid some kind of a predator, and
Uh-huh.
thought he heard something taking a bird. And his idea was he thought maybe it was a champ animal eating a bird. So there's another piece of evidence. And there is fossil preserved evidence of plesiosaurs teeth marks on bird bones, prehistoric bird bones from
Uh-huh.
the Mesozoic. So there's another possible piece of evidence.
It would make sense, right? That they would
Yeah.
feed upon the available protein sources in the lake.
Well, there's a resident population of snapping turtles that live in Lake
Mm.
Champlain. They prey on birds too. So I don't see why another possible aquatic reptile living in Lake Champlain wouldn't be feeding on birds too. They're probably eating amphibians. And like I said, there's all kinds of fish. Lake Champlain supports a population of lake sturgeons that can get 7 feet long. And they estimate that the historical population of these fish is 3,000 adult individuals. So if it can support 3,000 very large sturgeons, it could potentially support a smaller population of predatory aquatic reptiles or
That would,
fish, whatever champ is. You
I
know?
mean, what seemed most feasible to me, and I know that the lake is very popular with boaters and fishers and all the rest of it, but what seemed very plausible to me is that there was so much space to avoid people and so many nooks and crannies and little coves around
Yeah.
the lake, that essentially something that's 15 to 20 feet maximum, 15 to 20 feet long, it would be hard to spot. It would be hard to notice most of the time out there on the
Well,
water. If they were primarily nocturnal as well, or using the swamps
yeah.
and the
Well, if
marshes around as some sort of habitat too, that would be a
it's exploiting non-pulmonary forms of respiration directly from the water, like this butt breathing turtles or breathing
nice.
through their skin. This could give them the ability to stay underwater much longer than we normally assume that
Uh-huh.
an air breathing animal could. Now, an aquatic mammal would not be able to do this, but in theory, an aquatic reptile would be able to do this, and crocodiles do things like this too.
You
So,
told me this cloacal respiration, is that what it's called? You
cloacal
mentioned it
bird
before.
respiration, yeah,
Bird's respiration,
it's
yes.
basically how it works. These turtles have a sac in their cloaca, which is their butt, essentially, that
Uh-huh.
is lined with blood vessels. What they do is they draw the water into their cloacal sac, and the blood vessels that are in the sac absorb the oxygen directly from the water like a fish gill and get it into the bloodstream. So
Uh-huh.
essentially, using their cloacal sac as a fish gill.
That's very, very interesting. Now,
Some
is
of
it
the
the Mary River
ones,
turtle in Australia that has the
uh,
record for
the
for
Fitzroy River turtle is the one that exploits it the
Fitzroy?
most. They
Ah,
estimate that the Fitzroy River turtle gets 70% of its oxygen directly from the water through
oh,
this process. So it's essentially breathing like a fish.
wow,
So
that's amazing.
if you had, in theory, if you had a larger reptile that was exploiting the same thing,
Mhm.
that had a bigger cloaca, it might be able to do the same thing on a larger scale. And there's also been some speculation, not much, but a little in the scientific literature, that possibly plesiosaurs could have used this breathing method too. So it's highly speculative, but it is possible.
Well, I think in this particular area, all speculation is welcome since we know so little anyway. And it would, it's a fancy get out of jail free card, I guess, but it would helpfully explain the lack of sightings
Well,
during daylight. Anyway.
it is theoretically possible, and it depends entirely upon what you're prepared to believe. If you're absolutely got a closed mind on the subject, you could call it special pleading, but it is based on a real scientific fact.
Well, it is. I like that term, special pleading. It's always been very attractive to me, as I have been.
Depends on, if you are dead set against an idea, you can always scream special pleading or confirmation bias or whatever, just to make a point. That doesn't necessarily make it so.
It would appear to me, Scott, really, that over the years and observing all of the conversations that take place on the various forums, that you've actually, for somebody who's a believer in or an ascriber to the plesiosaur theory, you've actually walked a very fine line very effectively. Essentially, you're open to all of the ideas, and yet you've found some basis and backing for the one that you would, most prefer to.
I am actually friends with some very hardcore skeptics, and I respect them, and I think they respect me up to a point. And I've actually published 2 articles in the Skeptical Inquirer newsletter. How many pro-cryptozoology people have managed to do that? I have been extremely lucky. So obviously I must be, part of what I'm saying must be given some weight by even the skeptics. So I try to look at it from all different points of view just to get a thorough grounding on all the different viewpoints. Some people have come around to the idea that all of cryptozoology is not a zoological phenomenon, but a sociological phenomenon, that it's strictly a cultural thing. So I don't think that's the case, but the jury is still out. Let's wait and see. Open mind.
I don't think it's the case, but I think the culture surrounding it has many sociological elements to it that pertain to special pleading and confirmation bias, especially perhaps in things like Bigfoot studies.
Trying to walk a middle road is a double-edged sword. Now, I have a lot of friends with very disparate viewpoints on all this stuff, including skeptics. But at the same time, because I refuse to get pigeonholed into one corner, I take a lot of shit from all sides. But
I've seen it.
Road I choose to walk,
I've seen it, but what the outcome of that is that you actually maintain communication with all sides, and that's really necessary if we're ever to get any progress made in this particular area.
If you back me into a corner, I will tell you what I really think. I try not to let people back me into corners like that, but sometimes you walk up there and you have to, you have to fight your way out, and I usually do a pretty good job of doing that. So, I don't know.
What's very funny about that, Scott, actually, is you saying, if you back me into a corner, I'll tell you what I really think, is probably one of the most British statements I've ever heard from somebody who's not British, because culturally we don't like to tell people what we think. But I understand why you would be that way, because of course you get to have access to all of the information from all of the camps, and everybody keeps talking to you, and that's important.
In my personal life, I have friends from all kinds of diverse backgrounds from all over the world, so I'm used to communicating with people of different cultures, So I'm sure that helps, But I really do make an effort to read all the available literature, even the negative skeptical literature, just to get a thorough grounding and understanding of what people are trying to say. Then I step back and I look at all the stuff on the table, and I say, well, okay, this person thinks this about this over here, but this person over here has a completely opposite opinion. Which one do I think is closer to being right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can understand why people are skeptical of cryptozoology. People have been looking for the Loch Ness
Mm-hmm.
Monster almost 50 years. The Ian Milne sighting from 1930, we're coming up on the 90th anniversary of that. That was like the sighting before the Al D. McKay sighting that was really historically the beginning of the modern Loch Ness Monster hunt. They have been looking for Bigfoot for 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a lot of really compelling evidence for people who are not sympathetic to the idea that these animals really exist.
Yeah.
The only thing that's going to break through that wall is unambiguous physical evidence that these animals exist. If that ever happens with one of these big cryptids that people have been looking for, like the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti, Bigfoot, if that ever happens, the floodgates will open in theory. We'll be able to get funding for cryptozoological research because we'll have had a precedent. You know, it would be like when the coelacanth got discovered. You know, that opened the
Mm-hmm.
idea. Okay, animals that have been presumed extinct since the time of the dinosaurs could theoretically still be alive. At least open that door a crack, you know? So if we ever discovered the orang pendek or Sasquatch or the Loch Ness Monster or Champ or Cadborosaurus or any of those and really confirm it beyond all doubt, that will get us over the hump as far as credibility and being able to get funding and being able to write in the science journals like normal science fields. So, but that hasn't happened yet. You know, we've had things like the Zeo Maru carcass.
Mm-hmm.
Most people view as being a basking shark, and indeed, most of the evidence points in that direction. Yet there is a small residue of evidence that people question to say, wait a minute, you know, maybe this wasn't a basking shark, but that ship has already sailed, as far as I can tell. You know, that's just it is what it is.
We're
The
never
cat
really going to be able to go
photograph,
back and find out what really happened there because of the
yeah.
the information or the lack of in the beginning, even with the
Well,
biologist on board, uh,
the
essentially
problem the
sketching.
problem with the problem with the Zeo Maru carcass is that they didn't bring back the skull or
Mm.
some of the vertebrae. If they'd have done that, there probably would have been no mystery. Unfortunately, all they brought back were those fibers, you know, which is not much to work with. So,
No, that's not much to work with at all. And I think such is life. People in general out there in the world are not looking to collect evidence of unknown animals, and I can understand why the trawler captain threw the carcass overboard because it was going to ruin his catch, and that was his
yeah.
responsibility. You know,
Well,
Japanese culture.
they
You know
said
very
they
well that.
said in retrospect they said in retrospect that that was a mistake. That
Mm,
they should have just said the hell with the catch a fish and brought that carcass. That's after the fact, and it was
mm.
too late.
But I
Now,
think it's.
another interesting thing is the 1937 caddy carcass photograph, which is still compelling evidence, but without a piece of the actual body, people are always going to be able to say that, oh, it could have been made by a taxidermist or this or that. It could be a mutilated basking shark, you know? So that's another compelling piece of evidence, but ultimately, unless they find part of that carcass at this late date, which is unlikely to happen, it's probably another dead end. So
Yeah, yeah. I
the
mean,
Patterson film is compelling, but without a piece of corroborating evidence, people are always going to be able to say, "Oh, it's a guy in a suit," you know. So photographic evidence and even video evidence, especially today, when there's so much digital special effects technology to fake things, is never going to solve the mystery, you know.
I mean, it seems to me as if we constantly, especially in the case of Loch Ness, looking back into the past and disputing and uh, writing op-ed pieces on all of this past evidence, like the surgeon's photo and the caddy carcass and the Zeomara carcass and everything, that we can't essentially go back in time and prove or disprove. What we should
Yeah,
be looking for is new evidence, and that to
and
me
you've
seems to have
got to
stopped
look
at
at
lake
it.
monster research.
You've got to look at it too from the skeptical point of view. They point and they say, see, they've been arguing over the same evidence for
That's right.
50,
That's right.
90 years. You know, the same old piece of evidence without any new evidence, compelling evidence popping up.
Let
So,
it
you
go.
know,
Let it go. But do you
well,
think?
not
And I
let
have
it
a very
go. Just try to add to the evidence pile. You
Mhm.
know, best
But
I've been able to do is in 2016 with the Japanese, we got a video of some kind of appendage coming up, touching a piece of bait, and then in 2017, Will and I got that sonar blob. That's the best I've been able to do so far, but that's all happened in the last 4 years. So I figure to keep looking in deep water like I've been doing, it seems to be paying off to a certain extent. So that's what I'm going to keep doing.
and I think that's great, and that's really what I'm talking about, Scott. You're going out there year after year after year, trying to find evidence. But one thing that's been on my mind recently, especially in lake monster research, is it dying out as is the species dying out? The lake monster researcher, even in Lake Champlain, there are very few people left now actively researching um, around the clock. And same at Loch Ness. You know, Steve's been there for almost 30 years, and I don't
Yeah.
really see that there's anybody new to take his place within that with that same sort of fire and gusto that
Well,
belonged to that period. Is it perhaps dying out a little, and have other
I
cryptozoological
don't.
subjects
You have to
taken
think
over
that
the attention of the general public?
there are three sort of skeptical figures at Loch Ness that are all in advanced age, and that would
Mm-hmm.
be Adrian Shine, Tony Harmsworth, and Dick Rayner. They're
That's right.
not young men anymore, so I don't know. When these guys pass, there's definitely going to be some kind of a change at Loch Ness. Hopefully, Steve will be there, and I know Roland keeps going back every year,
Yes.
so he's in the game. You know, as far as actually physically looking for these things. So
Yes.
wait and see, you know. I would imagine 10, 20 years from now, if there's still things going on at Loch Ness, they're going to look a lot different than they do right now, you know, because
And how
some of
about
these have passed on, you know. I
mhm.
don't wish any ill will toward anybody, but I'm just saying,
No?
I mean,
Nobody
I'm
lives
getting old.
forever.
I'm
Mm.
56 years old. You know, I'm not a young kid anymore, so I'm starting to feel it too, you know.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I do. I really do. I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way. Um, well, my my feeling about it is that something different, some sort of new discovery or evidence, uh, some big, very established evidence would get a huge media attention back into these areas of Champlain or Loch Ness or wherever it might be is needed to interest the generation, the next
Well,
generation, the same way we were interested by, by
yeah.
the In Search of series, by the
Well,
Paddy footage, by the.
actually, the press is not helping right now. Every
Mhm.
time a mutilated whale
Oh
skeleton or a
gosh.
seal washes up, they trot it out like it's some kind of unknown sea monster. Or every time somebody gets a picture of a blob on the
Yeah.
surface of Loch Ness,
Yes.
or there's been a lot of wave videos and wave photographs lately that have been
I
trotted
know.
out as lake
I know.
monsters. That's not getting us anywhere, you know?
No, it's really not. I mean, the Ogopogo ones. Every time there's an Ogopogo one, it's always a standing wave. The
Yeah.
Loch Ness monster, 18 sightings
And
last year. I'm sure at least
get,
12 of those
getting
were.
getting closer to home, I was completely unimpressed by the sonar thing from Lake Champlain that was trotted out as being proof of Champ. I didn't see anything but potentially some mud volcanoes or possibly a couple of pieces of wood
Oh, what year
laying on
was?
the bottom of Lake Champlain. So I was unimpressed, but I've already gone on record with saying that. So
What was the last one? What year was that?
last summer.
Last summer. And what about the? Let's go back to the Elizabeth Muggenthaler, the echolocation sounds. What about those? Now, you had some involvement with that project, didn't you?
Yeah, I actually co-authored an abstract in the Acoustical Society of America about that. We were supposed to do a follow-up paper, but Liz has gone MIA. I don't know where she is, and
Oh,
until she pops up or passes away, I don't feel comfortable with going ahead and publishing the paper that we were working on. There is a draft version of it, but without her consent, I don't
yes.
feel going ahead with publishing it. If anything ever happens to her, I probably will attempt to publish it because then I'll feel like, well, I'm the only one left
Who could
to
publish it?
finish this
Yeah.
work up. Yeah, so I'm trying to respect her, but I think her sounds are still unexplained. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are a champ animal, but they
Hmm.
haven't been completely explained yet. They do bear some resemblance to the sounds that fish make when they pass gas. But
Uh-huh.
there is an ultrasound element that shouldn't be there that is characteristic of cetacean high frequency echolocation.
Hmm.
So, as long as that element is present there, that seems to rule out it being a fish sound because fish do not make ultrasonic sounds.
No, no, they do not.
Now,
And
other
w
sounds that have been recorded by other champ searchers, I
yes.
believe, are the sounds made by known fish. In
Uh-huh.
fact, specifically, I believe they are the sounds of lake sturgeons making chirping sounds, which have been confused for being beluga, and the
Hmm.
other sounds sound like a croaking frog. They're infrasound, which is low below the range of human hearing, and those appear to be the sounds of a fish called the freshwater drumfish, with the
Hmm.
scientific name of Plotonotus grunions. So, if you're curious about those sounds, please go check them out. That's my opinion on that. So,
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think we've we've pretty much covered the board here. Now, every time I speak to Scott, I just feel like I learned so much about this area, and it's good to have somebody that's dedicated, selflessly in many cases, so much of their time not only
well,
to researching lake monsters, but to sharing information about them with his colleagues as well. So I really thank you for that. Now, I know you've got a new expedition coming up to Lake Champlain soon. Just
yeah.
I will put the link here, but just tell people who are listening, where can they find you and where can they help and donate to your next
Well,
expedition?
the the GoFundMe is called Lake Champlain Monster Hunt. You'll see a picture of me standing on the shore of Lake Champlain at Oak Ledge Park holding a spear with biopsy dart on the end of it.
Uh,
That's my GoFundMe, and I really wish people would donate because I've still got to get plane tickets, and I need to get an underwater camera and some glow sticks as a lighting source for the underwater camera. But I did recently purchase a raft that I'm going to be using for part of the going out to explore places. So anybody wants to donate to that, please help. I have several Facebook groups and pages. The primary one is Lake Champlain Monster Champ Research by Scott Mardis, William Durgenis. And then there's a larger group, which is more general, called the Zombie Plesiosaur Society. And then I also have another Facebook page called Lake Champlain Mystery Animals. So those are the three primary outlets for my information and where I share information. So I encourage you to go to those. I also have a book out, an
uh-huh.
ebook on Amazon called Night of the Living Dead Plesiosaurs. It's only available as an ebook, but I like it. I'm proud of it. So I encourage people, if you're more curious about the evidence for possible marine reptile survival beyond the KT event, please read that book.
And I would suggest to anybody listening that you do read it. It is a very excellent book and donate if you can to Scott's expedition. I love your research, and I love the chats that we have. And again,
Yes.
say I always learn so much from them, and
Well,
it's good to have somebody who's willing to share their resources, which is very unusual often in the research community. So that's wonderful too.
I'm
So I would
I'm
suggest,
proud to be your friend, and thank you for. We always have good conversations, and you're intelligent. You know what you're talking about, and thank you for having me on.
thank you, Scott. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop it there.
How long did we go?
We
90 minutes.
went. No, yeah, 90 minutes.
All right,
That's
cool.
fantastic.